Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new film War for the Planet of the Apes, a movie I've been pretty excited to see, not only because I enjoy the Planet of the Apes franchise, but also I want to see where Matt Reeves stands as a filmmaker since he's been tapped recently to do the next Batman movie. But as always, before I get started, I should say I will be totally spoiler-free up to a point, and then I will give a massive, big, giant countdown and warning, and then I'll go into some specifics. But if you just want some general impressions, for the first few minutes, I'm going to be speaking in very broad strokes, so not to worry. From my point of view, this latest movie is a very, very solid movie. It's a very, very entertaining movie, but ultimately an unexceptional one. For me, if you're building a big, giant, dystopian sci-fi environment, eventually you have to do something with it, and I feel like the first two movies were setting the stage and building this world, and I just kept thinking to myself, all right, now finally they're going to tell this crazy story set in this crazy universe, and they're going to knock our socks off. And I feel like this movie almost wraps this trilogy up before it's even really had a chance to get underway. And perhaps that's being unfair because there is a lot to praise about this movie. Andy Serkis is absolutely awe-inspiring as Caesar. The special effects for his expressions and his face, maybe the best special effects I've ever seen. I mean, he communicates so much information with the smallest expression or turn of phrase, and it really is remarkable what Andy Serkis has been able to do to the field of motion capture performance. That was worth the price of admission alone, and there is a really, really killer battle sequence that starts this movie up. But ultimately, this movie is essentially a story about revenge, and to what degree will you allow your revenge to blind you to other concerns? Because without going into spoilers, there's a reason why Caesar gets incredibly pissed off early in the story and essentially goes on a revenge quest. And it ultimately leads into contact with this megalomaniac, kind of power-crazed madman played by Woody Harrelson, who has his own private army at his disposal, who has his own agenda. So while I was watching this movie, while I was into it the entire time, I definitely was fighting the urge to sleep in the first third or about the middle. But the movie does have a lot of heart, and it does have a lot of scenes where you feel genuine emotion. And any movie that makes you feel an emotional response is doing something well. Perhaps I had unfair expectations going into this because I feel like they've built the world's fastest, most kick-ass, like beautiful-looking sports car, and they haven't even really taken it for a test drive yet before they basically say, all right, trilogy's over. I'm like, but wait a second. You haven't done anything yet. Like the first 5 Planet of the Apes films, each one, either by accident or by design, is wildly different from the film that came before it. They have new ideas, whether it's skinless telepaths or time travel or fighting against radiation-infused madmen, or predictions about the end of the world. I mean, no one would ever make the claim that those first 5 movies were not uneven. They are wildly uneven. But amidst the wildly uneven stories, you get a lot of gems in there. And as Kevin Marr of Kevin Geeks Out is famous for saying, those first 5 movies are like the 5 fingers of a fist. And you can't even imagine one without the other, no matter which ones might be your particular favorite. Having now seen the trilogy of this new iteration of Planet of the Apes, it feels like a conclusion, and I'm left with a bit of a feeling of, why did we go through all that effort? Why did we go through all these motions to create this environment without actually trying to have a big, giant, massive payoff? So I'm disappointed. I was entertained, but I was disappointed. It is well worth the money, but it is not going to leave you spellbound when you're dealing with giant, mega sci-fi franchises. I think that's a realistic expectation, especially when we have so much incredible competition out there these days. But I should say, if you liked Rise of the Planet of the Apes, if you liked Dawn, actually, which one came first? Yeah. If you liked Rise of the Planet of the Apes, if you liked Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, you will definitely enjoy War for the Planet of the Apes. I'm not trying to shit on the film in any way, shape, or form. It is a very, very solid base hit. Perhaps it is a double. But for the end of a trilogy, I was hoping for a home run, and sadly just did not achieve that. But let me dig into some specifics now about what I loved and what I didn't like, and that maybe will help people understand where I'm coming from. So last spoiler warning, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to start digging into some details. So let's start with the best thing I think this movie has to offer. It opens with a phenomenal battle sequence. A battle sequence that shows that humans and some apes are now working together against the apes, which was a crazy twist. And the way the battle unfolds is just fascinating to behold, because you have high tech versus low tech, and you see that Caesar's essentially become this mythic figure at this point, and they have nothing but blind faith in him. And the way you see his men just hurl themselves into battle, it's really inspiring stuff to watch. So in terms of just sheer action, pound for pound, that opening scene just absolutely knocked me on my ass. I was like, hell yeah, we are in for a show here, people. But in a subsequent battle, Caesar loses his wife and loses one of his sons, and he decides to go on a quest to kill this character named the Colonel. And the Colonel's played by Woody Harrelson, and he hears a rumor that the Colonel basically has this giant military base to the north where he's waiting for reinforcements from another army. Caesar decides that the Colonel must be killed in order to preserve the safety of his people as they march on this giant trek, hoping for a safe new homeland that'll be far away from humans. Problems along the way, they all get captured by the Colonel and his men and are essentially brought to the base to build this giant wall, because as it turns out, Woody Harrelson's not expecting reinforcements, he's expecting an invasion, because Woody Harrelson has decided that in order to preserve the future of the human race, he must exterminate any humans who are showing signs of this new mutation in the simian flu, or the simian virus. As if you remember, the simian virus made apes smart, but also killed off the majority of the human race. And there's a new twist to it where some people are losing the power of speech. They don't lose the ability to think, but when they show symptoms, they kind of bleed out of their nose and mouth, and they're unable to speak. Which I thought was kind of cool, because it's building towards the status quo of what we see when Charlton Heston lands in the 1968 Planet of the Apes. But the fact that it doesn't simplify their thinking, they didn't really think that one through all the way, but I just kind of rolled with it. In any case, the Colonel wants to wipe out all traces of people showing those symptoms, and as a result, people think he's a madman, and there's another army of humans that's coming in to wipe him and his men out. And so he needs to use Caesar's people to build up his defenses in time before he gets attacked. So most of this movie is a lot like Bridge on the River Kwai, where you have people who are essentially prisoners of war being forced to do something, and Caesar is having to take a lot of stands in order to get food and water for his people, while at the same time trying to figure out an escape plan for all the children. And luckily he has help from a few people, including a young human girl who has lost the power of speech. And it all builds towards this giant conclusion where you have this battle taking place between the two human sides, while the apes are just trying to get out of the way before they become casualties of war. One of my reasons I was frustrated was that most of the humans are pretty stupid and ineffectual, and they're a little thin. And even Woody Harrelson is the most charismatic of the human characters. Even he is pretty ineffectual. When we first see him ruling over this camp, he's refusing to give the apes any food or water. It's like, oh, well, they'll get food and water when they finish with the wall. But even a 9-year-old who was in this position would realize, oh, if you're expecting people to build something, clearly they're going to need food and water, or they're going to be rapidly dead, especially when they're working essentially exposed to snow and the elements. It was just sloppy, poor writing, and I didn't buy it, and I was just annoyed that he wasn't a more compelling, interesting villain. Also, the final battle, because we don't even know who's on the opposite side, and we're not really engaged with the people on Woody's side, it's a little bit of a strange thing where the main characters that we know and love aren't even really participating. I mean, Caesar's participating a little bit, but anytime you have a massive third act to your story with major things happening, your central characters need to play a role in those events, or you're uninvested. And so that was another source of frustration. In the first battle that opens the movie, I was incredibly invested, and I was just meeting these characters for the first time. The final battle of this movie really let me down. And I guess what I was really let down by was that at the end of the movie, there's no major changes to the status quo. When you're doing world building, especially one where most of the human race has been wiped out, you have the liberty and the freedom to try so many wildly revolutionary stories, and they just don't really go for anything. They don't take any risks. It's basically a simple oppressed versus the oppressor scenario that we've seen many times. But when you're dealing with Planet of the Apes, you can get fucking weird if you wish to. My hope is that if they decide to make more of these Planet of the Apes movies, they will decide to get a little weird, because granted, the late 60s and early 70s was a very different time and place, but each movie tried to do something new, and it's just frustrating that this Planet of the Apes series, this new one, has played it so cautiously. So in closing, I'll just say, all around, perfectly fine movie. I do not regret spending my money on it. I do not regret investing in this trilogy. But as someone who loves science fiction and who loves bold original concepts, I was just really hoping that they would respect the integrity of the original 5 movies and make a crazy new franchise in the spirit of the originals. Not necessarily the same stories or the same tone, but something in the same wildly experimental spirit, Planet of the Apes 1968 might have the best cliffhanger, status quo changing ending of any science fiction movie ever made. So when you're making a Planet of the Apes movie, that's where people's expectations are. And if you don't match them, you're going to get assholes like me talking on YouTube about why the movie is pretty good, but not great. So yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it. War for the Planet of the Apes is a pretty good movie, but it's not great, and I probably won't be going back to see it for a second time. But fingers crossed, I sincerely hope that Matt Reeves delivers a Batman movie that'll absolutely knock our socks off and blows our minds. I hope he doesn't play it safe, because while some people don't like Christopher Nolan's approach to the Batman universe that he did with this trilogy, but he definitely had his own take. It's his own Nolan universe that we all know and love really, really well. And if you're going to make a Batman universe, you're living in his shadow. Even Tim Burton's universe, which was 89 and 92, has a unique take. And I feel like Planet of the Apes needed a unique take to make it fresh and relevant and original again. But who knows? Maybe the next movie they'll let Andy Serkis direct it, because Andy Serkis clearly is the best thing this series has going for it. So turn him loose and let him go nuts. Even though his character dies in this, as we've seen in the previous Planet of the Apes movies with Roddy McDowall, you just have him play his son 30, 40 years in the future, because we're dealing with futuristic concepts and you can do whatever the hell you want. So Andy Serkis could easily come back and do more movies set in this universe. I, for one, would love to see more Planet of the Apes movies, but if and only if they go fucking nuts and really try to hit a home run, as opposed to playing it safe and going for the single. In any case, I hope this mild negativity mixed with mild positivity has not turned you off. If you're a big fan of the movie, more power to you. Maybe I just wasn't in the right mood for it. I hope you'll consider giving my channel a subscribe. If you want to talk more or tell me how wrong I am about War for the Planet of the Apes, just give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax, or leave a comment in the comments below. I hope everyone has an awesome weekend, and I look forward to talking more on Sunday night about Game of Thrones and Twin Peaks. So long.